Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
Welcome. Today we are here to jump into the topic of storytelling in customer research. We as customer researchers, especially those of us that are coming out of more academic type settings or research oriented organizations, are sometimes stuck in the activities of performing research and delivering the insights, but we forget that storytelling is such an impactful way to convey the insights that we've gathered. And so we have to use those opportunities to weave stories into our research findings and presentations of the insights, and to use stories to facilitate and to frame collaboration. And when you're selling what you do, whether you're inside of an organization or you're independent, you own your own company, you're a consultant, use stories to sell the impact of your work. So what have you seen? I can tell you what I've seen. So I've seen the challenge of us telling stories amongst ourselves when we're in the process of talking about the findings that we've gathered in a project. We'll talk about it amongst ourselves. We might weave a few little details into a project, but I feel like over time, I've recognized how much more valuable it is to make sure that those stories have a prominent place at the beginning of a project and to weave them throughout to make kind of that, to make the point hit home in terms of what we found.
Yeah, I agree. And just so you know, Kenya, you're breaking up on me a little bit. And I'm not sure if it's on my end or you're in a delay. So
Okay. Okay.
if I look a little confused at times, I think that's what just happened. So agree with everything I could hear you say around storytelling. So I think there's so much to be said about storytelling. We've all been in those meetings where we're 2 hours into slides just showing data points, and those data points are important, but people glaze over and it just doesn't activate that engagement you have when you tell that story. So you give the context of how what that data is, right? So I know we both have examples. I worked on a platform for practice management. It could be any practice, but practice management, we could go back and say, hey, people are having hard tracking time. They're forgetting to track time, whatever it may be. But when you tell the story of, hey, John's in his office, John's in his monthly billing cycle, and in walks, his assistant. And she's got to get those invoices out. And John doesn't know, and he's panicking because, yes, he's using our product, but there are all these other pieces they have. Outlook, Outlook, QuickBooks, for instance. There's an admin involved. So watching, telling the story of that journey, and especially given the context of where's the pain point when that happens. It just conveys more of what a data point means, that, hey, I need better time tracking. 9 out of 10 people said, I need better time tracking. Okay, A, what's that mean? But B, yeah, okay, we'll think about time tracking. Telling the story of it upending an office, every single month, to the point of lots of arguing, lots of running around, lots of trying to recreate things. Telling that story is very different than just giving that data point. Even better if you can show that story. That's a new level of almost like visual auditory engagement with the user as part of the storytelling. So I've always I know storytelling's becoming more trending lately, in our field. But I think it's something I've actually always tried to do so that it would resonate, so people understood the context and they actually understood the conflict or the pain point and challenges around that. in a very tangible way.
I really like what you said, and I think about Karen Eber's book about storytelling, and you use the word several times, context. The first thing you've got to have is the
Yes.
context and that conflict. What is that challenge that exists? The outcome that comes from that situation and you doing something to move the needle for that particular user or customer, and then the takeaway. So what is that action or insight that you want your team, the team that you're working with, to consume in terms of what they do differently, what they do better in the product or service experience? Those four pieces are so key to you communicating or telling an effective story. And in that story, you may not use the the detail of just one customer that you've talked to or
Right.
engaged with. You might take and string along a story that encompasses all of your engagements across, a handful, 12, 20 different customers, and you looked for that continuity in terms of that context, that conflict, those outcomes that they're looking for, and how you can influence those, and then the takeaway. And you want that takeaway to be something that can serve more than just one customer. That's why it's so important to tell that collective story. So I think that weaving those stories into your research findings, like you said, you've been doing this for a while. Some of us don't always think about doing that, just because we get so honed in on, we've got to articulate that data point, and then what does that mean in terms of the and so what, that we forget that there's a story to tell in that. And stories resonate with people, they stick,
Yep.
they really, really stick.
They stick and they allow for richer collaboration, especially when you're talking about sitting with your development teams and you're really having a session after. And by the way, going back to what you said, yes, a story should really, you may use one story as an example to illustrate the bigger. Never is, one customer story. Yeah, hey, we got to go change everything. But yeah, definitely tell it in a story. But yeah, use those, that collaboration. Thank you. I jumped ahead, didn't I? But it really helps because it can pull people back in. We've been in the brainstorming sessions or where you're trying to problem solve a problem, come up with the solution. You get off track. You kind of blow up all kinds of solutions. Stories can help you put everyone on the same page of what you're focusing on. And it can also make you take the various solutions and go, okay, plug that into that story. Is it going to change that outcome? Is it going to change that conflict? It's a much more, again, tangible way of looking at your customers' journeys, their pain points, as well as your desired outcomes. You see their outcomes with the story where it is today. What would the story be for that same scenario based on the different solutions you're brainstorming? So I think they go a long way for collaborating and informing, the collaboration piece, but also the informing, because again, I think people wrap their heads around that more than some data point I've thrown on a PowerPoint presentation.
Right. And you just mentioned it several times. When you think about that, can you hear me okay?
I can
Okay.
now. Yeah.
When you think about the journey, you just mentioned it several times. You incorporate, or in that process of playing back the journey, the customer journey, you can do that in a way where you've gathered that customer journey information, you've mapped it out into a visual representation of the customer journey, but you can use a story to help walk others through that journey in a way that's more engaging, that illustrates some of the sentiment differently than just reading things in terms of what you see in each area of that journey. It's much more captivating and engaging to include that sort of detail to string things along more cohesively, and to also, like you said, when you look at that solutioning aspect of things, when you talk through the journey, it makes it so much easier to recognize when ideas might not fit within the realm
Right.
of that journey, and how, okay, let's focus on those things that are feasible based on that sentiment that we're hearing, or how that story conveys that context in a way that we know that certain things are not going to
Right.
be feasible from a solution standpoint.
Right. Exactly. I know you
One,
had third ticker.
no, the last point I think that it's important for us to make is the fact that stories are also, there's a book called Story Selling. And when
Yes.
you think about stories in the process of selling, for us, selling is to a prospect or a client. But for many of our partners that are inside of organizations, or colleagues that are inside of organizations, selling is still a part of your job. You've got to make sure that you can justify the need to have your representation in that project schedule, so that there's time baked in for you to capture that journey, for you to tell those stories. And so when you think about selling the value of being engaged and staying engaged in different projects, you've got to think about telling those stories during the selling process. It's not just during the readout or the debrief. It's also about upfront telling those stories, or selling why it's so important that we're involved, because of, look at the outcomes and the transformation we've, been able to influence in the past. This is why it's so important that we continue to do or be a part of these projects.
Yeah. And I like you mentioned that you have to sell your story to your stakeholders. Yeah, in consulting we have certain stakeholders, but who has to sell? I mean, honestly, let's be really honest. More than a UXer, more than a user researcher in house. Who has to sell more than them, than us when we're working in an organization? You don't have to. Your client or your executive stakeholders, they're your product managers. What better way than not to dump a bunch of, SAT scores, error rates, yeah, that's for all important. But what better way to make them grasp what you're recommending? And we always, as UXers, I mean, 9 times out of 10, we're having to push and sell on something that's not seen as a priority or a big issue. Tell the story, tell the story, and that is a great way to sell it. I mean, it's a great way. We use it all the time from a consulting perspective, but in-house you need as much as you can have, to sell your stakeholders, even as an in-house user researchers. And stories are a great way. They're a great way to convey that journey. When people don't want to look at a journey map and sticky notes and all that, fine. You mentioned that before. Put it in a story, a cohesive story. Lay that out. You think something's a big problem, you might know it from all the research you've done. Having convinced others, stories sometimes can do that because it makes it real.
Hmm. And in what you just said, the really key component is that you listen for what pushback or apprehension or confusion your
Yeah.
stakeholders have in understanding where you can deliver value, because sometimes it's not always an obvious play in terms of how you can help to deliver value and move the needle. So you want to listen for those cues around where that individual or those individuals are expressing what their problem or where their concerns lie with that particular solution, and what are some characteristics of that challenge that they're discussing, or that you all are discussing, and how can you find a story in your playbook that you can pull out and show the similarities in terms of where that customer is, their starting point, or the type of challenge they're encountering, or the way in which you utilize your product or service to help solve that challenge. So you want to look for those similarities so that you can then pull out the right story that helps them to kind of connect the dots around, this is what you're saying in terms of how
Yep.
you can help us move the needle.
Yep. Because again, just like we've all been in presentations where you have all this rich data and we're just glazing over, how many have you been in where someone's presenting a bunch of data, a bunch of numbers, a bunch of whatever, and you're actually like, well, why does this matter? I mean, why does it matter? Well, story will tell them why it matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you just said that, it reminds me that data scientists also have the opportunity to get outside of your own head around that data and the excitement that that data brings you, and think about how you can not only tell that story effectively in a visual manner, but also how you tell the story to supplement or to complement
Mhm.
that visual picture. So tell me that context of why this data matters, and then you want to give me the conflict or what this data represents in terms of showing me where a problem or an opportunity exists,
Mhm.
and then help me to understand how I can then act on this data and the transformation that will occur as a result.
Right.
Those four pieces are key in you being able to tell a really effective story and why that data matters. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so yes, thank you so much for listening. You have questions for us, please don't hesitate to reach out to info@leangeeks.net. We thank you again for listening, and we will see you next week when we talk about some strategies for storytelling. And if you have any other ideas for us in terms of topic areas or discussion items, do not hesitate to reach out. Have a good week, and we'll see you next time.